Deathworld by Harry Harrison, Chapter 22, read by Gerald Frost. Jason stood to one side and watched as the deadly cargo was loaded into the hold of the ship. The Pyreans were in good humor as they stowed away riot guns, grenades, and gas bombs. When the backpack atomic bomb was put aboard, one of them broke into a marching song, and the others picked it up. Maybe they were happy, but the approaching carnage only filled Jason with an intense gloom. He felt that somehow he was a traitor to life. Perhaps the life form that he had found needed destroying. Perhaps it didn't. Without making the slightest attempt at conciliation, destruction was plain murder. Kirk came out of the operations building, and the starter pumps could be heard whining inside the ship. They would leave within minutes. Jason forced himself into a foot-dragging rush and met Kirk halfway to the ship. "I'm coming with you, Kirk. You owe me that much at least for finding them." Kirk hesitated, not liking the idea. "This is an operational mission," he said. "No room for observers, and the extra weight. It's too late to stop us, Jason. You know that." "You Pyreans are the worst liars in the universe," Jason said. "We both know that ship can lift 10 times the amount it's carrying today. Now, do you let me come or forbid me without any reason at all?" "Get aboard," Kirk said, "but keep out of the way or you'll get trampled." This time, with a definite destination ahead, the flight was much faster. Maida took the ship into the stratosphere in a high ballistic arc that ended at the islands. Kirk was the co-pilot seat, and Jason sat behind them, where he could watch the screens. The landing party, 25 volunteers, were all in the hold below with weapons. All the screens of the ship were switched to the forward viewer. They watched the green island appear and swell, and then vanish beneath the flames of the braking rockets. Jockeying the ship carefully, Maida brought it down on a flat shelf near the cave mouth. Jason was ready this time for the blast of mental hatred, but it still hurt. The gunners laughed and killed gleefully as every animal on the island closed upon the ship. They were slaughtered by the thousands, and still they came. "Do you have to do this?" Jason asked. "It's murder. It's carnage. Just butchery. Look at all the beasts piling up." "Self-defense," Kirk said. "They attack the ship. We kill them. What could be simpler? Now, shut up, or I'll throw you out there with them." It was half an hour before the gunfire slackened. Animals still attacked, but the mass assault seemed to be over. Kirk spoke to the intercom. "Landing party away, and watch your step. They know we're here, and will make it as hot as they can. Take the bomb into that cave and see how far back it runs. We can blast them from the air, but if we do, there's no doubt they're dug into solid rock. Keep your screens open. Leave the bomb and pull back at once if I tell you to. Now, move." The men swarmed down the ladders and formed into an open battle formation. They were soon under attack, but the beasts were picked off before they could get close. It didn't take long for the main point to reach the cave. He had his pickup trained in front of him, and the watchers in the ship followed the advance. "Big cave," Kirk grunted. "Slants back and down. That's what I was afraid of. Bomb dropped on that would just close it up, with no guarantee that anything sealed in it couldn't eventually get back out. We'll have to see how far it goes down." There was enough heat in the cave now to use the infrared filters. The rock walls stood out harshly black and white as the advance continued. "No signs of life since entering the cave," the officer reported. "An odd bones at the entrance and some bat droppings. It looks like a natural cave, so far." Step by step, the advance continued, slowing as it went. Insensitive as the Pyreans were to psi pressure, even they were aware of the blast of hatred being continuously leveled at them. Jason, back in the ship, had a headache that suddenly grew worse instead of better. "Watch out!" Kirk shouted at the screen with horror. The cave was filled from wall to wall with pallid, eyeless animals. They poured from tiny side passages and seemed to literally emerge from the ground itself. Their front rank dissolved in flame, but more kept pressing in on the screen, and the watchers on the ship saw the cave spin dizzily as the operator fell. Pale bodies washed up and over and concealed the lens. "Close ranks! Flamethrowers and gas!" Kirk bellowed at the mic. Less than half of the men were alive after that first attack. The survivors, protected by flamethrowers, set off the gas grenades. Their sealed battle armor protected them while the section of the cave filled with gas. Someone dug through the bodies of the attackers and found the pickup. "Leave the bomb now and withdraw," Kirk ordered. "We've suffered enough losses." A different man stared out of the screen. The officer was dead. "Sorry, sir," he said, "but just as easy to go forward as it is to go back as long as the gas grenades rolled out. We're too close to pull back now." "That's an order!" Kirk shouted. But the man was gone from the screen, and the advance continued. Jason's fingers hurt where he had clamped onto the chair arm. He had pulled them loose and massaged them. On the screen, the black and white of the cave flowed steadily past. Minute after minute went by this way. Each time the animals attacked, a few more gas grenades were used up. "Something ahead looks different," the panting voice cracked from the speaker. The narrow cave slowly opened into a gigantic chamber, so large that the roof and far walls were lost in the distance. "What are those?" Kirk asked. "Get a searchlight. Over to the right." The picture on the screen was fuzzy and hard to see now, dimmed by layers of rock in between. Details could not be made out clearly, but it was obviously something unusual. "Never saw anything like that before," the speaker said. "Look like big plants of some kind, 10 meters tall at least. Yet they're moving. Those branches, tentacles, or whatever, keep pointing towards us, and I get the darkest feelings in my head." "Blast one," Kirk said. "See what happens." The gun fired, and at the same instant, an intensified wave of mental hatred rolled over the men, dropping them to the ground. They rolled in pain, blacked out, and unable to think or fight the underground beast that poured over them. The attack was renewed and overwhelmed. In the ship far above, Jason felt the shock to his mind and wondered how the men could live through it. The others in the control room had been hit by it as well. Kirk pounded the frame of the screen and shouted at the unhearing men below. "Pull back! Come back now!" It was too late. The men had only stirred slightly as the victorious Pyrean animals washed over them, clawing for joints in the armor. Only one man moved, standing up and beating the creatures away with his bare hands. He stumbled a few feet forward, bent over the writhing mass below him. With a heave of his shoulders, he pulled another man up. The man was dead, but his shoulder pack was still strapped to his back. Bloody fingers fumbled at the pack. Then both men were washed back under a wave of death. "That was the bomb!" "That was the bomb!" Kirk shouted to Maida. "If he didn't change the setting, it's on a 10-second minimum fuse. Get out of here!" Jason had just time to fall back on the acceleration couch before the rockets blasted. The pressure leaned on him and kept mounting. Vision blacked out, but he didn't lose consciousness. Air screamed across the hull, and then the sound stopped as they left the stratosphere. Just as Maida cut the power, a glare of white light burst from the screens. They turned black instantly as the hull pickups burned out. She switched filters into place, then pressed a button that rotated new pickups into position. Far below, in the boiling sea, a climbing mushroom cloud spread. Flame filled the spot where the island had been. The three of them looked at it silently, unmoving. Kirk recovered first. "Head for home, Maida, and get the screens in operation. 25 men dead, but they did their job. They knocked out those beasts, whatever they were, and ended the war. I can't think of a better way for a man to die." Maida set the orbit and then called the operators. "Trouble getting through," she said. "I have a robot landing beam response, but no one is answering the call." A man appeared on the empty screen. He was beaded with sweat, and a harried look was in his eyes. "Kirk," he said, "is that you? Get the ship back here at once. We need your firepower at the perimeter. All blazes broke out a moment ago, and a general attack on every side. Worse than anything I've ever seen." "What do you mean?" Kirk stammered in unbelief. "The war is over. We blasted them. We destroyed their headquarters completely." "The war is going like it never has gone before," the other snapped back. "I don't know what you did, but it stirred up the stew pot of hell here. Now stop talking and get the ship back." Kirk turned slowly to face Jason. His face pulled back into a look of raw animal savagery. You did it! I should have killed you the first time I saw you. I wanted to. Now I know I was right. You've been like a plague since you landed here, sowing death in every direction. I knew you were wrong, yet I let your twisted words convince me. And now look what has happened. First you killed Welf, then you murdered those men in the cave. Now this attack on the perimeter. All who died, you will have killed. Kirk advanced on Jason, step by slow step, hatred twisting his features. Jason backed away until he could retreat no further, his shoulders against the chart case. Kirk's hand reached out now. Not a fighting blow, but an open palm slap. Though Jason rolled with it, it still battered him and stretched him full length onto the floor. His arm was against the chart case, his fingers near the sealed tubes that held the jump matrices. Jason seized one of the heavy tubes with both hands and pulled it out. He swung it with all of his strength into Kirk's face. It broke the skin on his cheek and collarbone, skin on his cheek and forehead, and the blood ran from the cuts. But it didn't slow or stop the big man in the slightest. His smile had no mercy as he reached down and dragged Jason to his feet. "Fight back! I will have at least that much more pleasure as I kill you." He drew back the granite fist that would tear Jason's head from his shoulders. "Go ahead," Jason said, and stopped struggling. "Kill me. You can do it easily. Only don't call it justice. Welf died to save me, but the men on that island died because of your stupidity. I wanted peace. You wanted war. Well, now you have it. Kill me to soothe your conscience, because the truth is something you can't face up to." With a bellow of rage, Kirk drove the pile driver fist down. Maida grabbed the arm in both her hands and hung on, pulling it aside before the blow could land. The three of them fell together, half crushing Jason. "Don't do it!" she screamed. "Jason didn't want those men to go down there. That was your idea. You can't kill him for that." Kirk exploded with rage. He was past hearing. He turned his attention to Maida, tearing her form from him. She was a woman, and her supple strength was meager compared to his great muscles. But she was a Pyrean woman, and she did what no off-worlder could. She slowed Kirk down for a moment, stopped the fury of his attack until he could rip her hands loose and throw her aside. It didn't take long for him to do that, but it was enough time for Jason to get to the door. Jason stumbled through the door and shut the lock behind him. A split second after he had driven the bolt home, Kirk's weight plunged into the door. The metal screamed and bent, giving way. One hinge was torn loose, and the other held on by a shred of metal. It would go down with the next blow. Jason wouldn't wait for that. He hadn't stayed to see if the door would stop the raging Pyrean. No door on this ship could do that. Fast as possible, Jason went down the gangway. There was no safety on the ship, which meant he had to get off it. The lifeboat deck was just ahead. Ever since first seeing them, he had given them a lot of thought. He thought, though he hadn't looked ahead to this situation, he knew a time might come when he would need transportation of his own. The lifeboats had seemed to be the best bet, except that Maida had told him they had no fuel. She had been right about one thing. The boat he had been in had empty tanks. He'd checked that. There were 5 other lifeboats, though, that he hadn't examined. He had wondered about the idea of useless lifeboats and had come to what he hoped was a correct conclusion. This spaceship was the only one the Pyrians had, and Maida had once told him that they had always wanted to buy another ship, but never did. Some other necessity of war had always managed to come up first. One ship was enough for their uses. The only difficulty lay in the fact that they had to keep the ship in operation, or the Pyrian city was dead. Without supplies, they would be wiped out in a few months. Therefore, the ship's crew couldn't conceive of abandoning their ship. No matter what kind of trouble they got into, they couldn't leave her. When the ship died, so did their world. With this kind of thinking, there was no need to keep the lifeboats fueled. Not all of them, at least. Though it stood to reason that at least one of them had fuel for short flights, that this would have been wasteful from the parent ship. At this point, Jason's chain of logic grew weak. Too many ifs. If they used the lifeboats at all, if one of them should be fueled, if it did, it would be fueled right now. And if it were fueled, which one of the 6 would it be? Well, not the one that Jason had mounted his equipment in, so it was 1 in 5. Jason had no time to go looking. He had to be right the first time. His reasoning had supplied him with an answer, the last of a long line of suppositions. If a boat were fueled, it should be the one nearest to the control cabin, the one he was diving towards now. His life depended upon this string of guesses. Behind him, the door went down with a crash. Kirk bellowed and leaped. Jason hurled himself through the lifeboat port with the nearest thing to a run he could manage under the double gravity. With both hands, he grabbed the emergency launch handle and pulled down. The alarm bell rang, and the port slammed shut, literally in Kirk's face. Only his Pyrean reflexes saved him from being smashed. Solid fuel rocket launchers exploded and blasted the lifeboat clear of the parent ship. Their brief acceleration slammed Jason to the deck. Then he floated as the boat went into free fall. The main drive rockets did not fire. In that moment, Jason learned what it was like to know he was dead. Without fuel, the boat would simply drop to the jungle before, falling like a rock and bursting apart like a watermelon when it hit. There was no way out. Then the rockets caught, roared, and he dropped to the deck, bruising his nose. He sat up, rubbing it and grinning. There was fuel in the tanks. The delay in starting had only been part of the launch cycle, giving the lifeboat a time to fall clear of the ship. Now to get it under control. He pulled himself into the pilot's seat. The altimeter had fed information to the autopilot, leveling off the boat parallel to the ground below. Like all lifeboat controls, these were childishly simple, designed to be used by novices in an emergency. The autopilot could not be shut off. It rode along with the manual controls, tempering foolish piloting. Jason hauled the control wheel into a tight turn, and the autopilot gentled it into a soft curve. Through the port, he could see the big ship blaring fire in a much tighter turn. Jason didn't know who was flying it or what they had in mind, so he took no chances. Jamming the wheel forward into a dive, he cursed as they eased into a gentle drop. The larger ship had no such restrictions. It changed course with a violent maneuver and dived on them. The forward turret fired, and an explosion at the stern rocked the little boat. This either knocked out the autopilot or shocked it into submission. The slow drop turned into a power dive, and the jungle billowed up. Jason pulled back on the wheel, and there was just time to get his arms in front of his face before they hit. Thundering rockets, cracking trees, and at the end a great splash. Silence followed, and smoke drifted away. High above, the spaceship circled hesitantly, dropping a bit as if they wanted to go down and investigate, then rising higher as the urgent message for aid came from the city. Loyalty won, and the ship turned and spewed fire towards home. chapter 23. I'm going to stop here, and we will start with chapter 23 tomorrow night.